Thank you. This is one of hundreds of prayers in Arabic that we have from the pen of Baha'u'llah, and then we have many more from Abdul-Baha. There's a book called Prayers and Meditations by Baha'u'llah in English, translated by the guardian of the Baha'i faith, superb English. And the Westerners, at first, it's always English, they just know that it's English. But if you knew that, I think there's 4 Persian Farsi prayers in that book. All the rest of 180, 90 prayers are in Arabic. This was really the preferred language of Baha'u'llah. They asked Abdul-Baha, what did Baha'u'llah, why did he choose Arabic? And he said Arabic, that Baha'u'llah used to say Arabic is like milk and Farsi is like honey. And he said they combine very well. And he used to mix in his tablets, and the revelation would come out sometimes in Arabic and sometimes in Farsi. I wanted to just mention, because I had this privilege of being in the Holy Land and hearing from old-timers stories there about the early days of the faith. It's not so long ago, you know. There's the children of the children remember the stories. And I think everybody here knows that the Baha'is are those people who are upholding the teachings of Baha'u'llah, that believe that the message of Baha'u'llah is a valid message and an important humanity. It's the message of God for the time we live in. And that through our efforts to implement those teachings, we assist in a transformation of human society and moving on to the last and most sublime stage of social evolution on this planet, which is full unification. Baha'u'llah says so many things about the oneness of mankind. He says, reflect, why have we made you all from the same dust? He said, that's so no one can exalt himself above another. We're all mud. We're all dirt to start off with, and we come up from there. And he explains that the human race, without the manifestations of God, sinks into a kind of condition that is filled with selfishness and oftentimes violence. And that if it's not for the holy books of the great religions that have come and established a certain baseline of activities and the way we treat each other, we would be totally lost. And through those words, the divine words, the verses of God, ayatollah, the verses of God that are in the Quran and in the Torah and in the Evangel, the spiritual basis of mankind wouldn't be recognized. There have been other branches. Baha'u'llah says, God has never left humanity bereft of guidance. So you go down in South America and you listen to the native peoples, they said, oh, we had a messenger, his name was Viracocha, and he walked on the waters of Lake Titicaca. When we heard about Jesus, we said, oh, that's very similar to our... Of course, the Christians wondered, how can somebody else walk on the water? This is impossible. But everywhere you go, you find traces of guidance. And recently, the House of Justice published a talk of Abdul-Baha in which he says there are 3 kinds of prophets. We've all heard about 2, which are the major prophets of God, and then those that depend on the inspiration of the major prophets, but rule like the Israelitish rulers, kings, like King David and so on, who, besides he has given us the Psalms, but at the same time he's been a ruler. The prophets endowed with constancy, Baha'u'llah calls them. He said, are the ones that reveal a book. They bring a new law system, and they bring a renewal of the verses of God, a further outpouring of single message that's been coming down to humanity from Adam on as far as the recorded history, religious history of mankind is concerned. This is also a beautiful image. This is one of the keys for establishing the oneness of mankind. I'm very pleased to hear you come from different religious backgrounds, because that's the whole miracle of Baha'u'llah's coming, is that he has been able to unite people of all different backgrounds. Pretty hard at the time Baha'u'llah appeared that a person didn't have a religious background. So the millions of Baha'is around the world, 180 national Baha'i communities, have all derived from one or the other of the religions that all of us are following, have been following. So this is an interesting proof that his words are able to reconcile the hearts and bring people together. And he said the whole purpose of his message is to establish this unity. He comes with this message. Now tonight I thought to do something a little different. We're speaking here about the Baha'u'llah's forbidden clergy. And he's quite strong, vehement about the fact that the religions have been degenerated and practically influenced, practically destroyed through bad clergy. Clergy, the best of the clergy are saints. They're heroes. They're guides of mankind. But the ones that have taken personal advantage, or because of the position they could rule over others, or have introduced laws and rulings for their own convenience, this has led to a deterioration, and presently it's led to a certain general rejection on the part of mankind of the role of religion. You know, it's like a bad word. Spirituality. Talk to me about spirituality. Don't talk to me about religion. Religion. I don't know anything about organized religion. What other kind of religion could you have than an organized one? You can have bad ones and good ones. That's possible, but they're not bad in their origin. They're only, it's the present decay, if you will. And Abdu'l-Bahá, when he's traveling, he says that religion comes like the seasons of the year. It starts as the springtime, and it causes a surge of excitement and the melting of the winters of discontent and disbelief. And it creates a resurgence in spiritual vision and in hope and trust in God and connection with God. So that's the springtime. It leads into the summer, when you have the first crops coming as a result of the spring and the seeds being planted. And that goes up, produces a new society, a civilization. I think, you know, how... I think one of the easiest ones to recognize, of course, is Islamic civilization, because of the high level of arts and architecture that were produced through Islam. But you also have the Hindu faith, and you have Buddhist architecture. You can identify a culture because the spirit that comes with the revelation itself permeates all mankind and gradually causes seeds to flower. But they're flowering because of that particular spirit that God sent for that time and for those people. And so it results in new arts, new sciences, new developments. Well, that's a terrific thing. And that's, he said, that is the fruit towards the end of summer and then the autumn. Everybody's enjoying the benefits of what's happened in the summer and has absorbed the influence of the sacrifice of the springtime believers, whom oftentimes were persecuted or martyred. One of the signs of the truth of a religion is that it's attacked, violently attacked. There hasn't been a single one that's come that's just been, everybody said, oh, it's wonderful, welcome. No. And who are the ones that usually tell us that it's not a true religion?
The ones preceding.
The ones preceding and their leaders. The clergy of the previous religion is usually the most violent enemies. The greatest enemies of Baha'u'llah were the Bab were the Shia clergy in Iran, who after centuries of composing odes and prayers, begging for the Qaim to come, longing for the day of the promised return of the messenger of God, who will bring a message that will unite them with all mankind and subdue all of the nations of the world. That prayer is being invoked when the manifestation, the new messenger of God comes. And they're the first ones that denounce, and of course are gravely threatened by the coming of a new teaching. A new heaven and a new earth is no joke. I mean, it's a new heaven and a new earth. It's a new religious system. It's a new code of laws for mankind. It's always a challenge. So what I was saying, a little different I wanted to do tonight is that a reminder, and there's a number of you who are friends of the faith and not haven't recognized the cause, haven't embraced the cause as Baha'is, understand that Baha'u'llah, because he's forbidden clergy, what happens? How does the faith spread? He's not living for all eternity. He is spiritually lives for all eternity, but not as a physical being. So he passes that responsibility in his holy book to the believers. And he says that it is the first duty of every believer to proclaim the cause of God to others. Now, the Baha'is, we feel challenged. I mean, new Baha'is, we feel challenged, and indeed we should feel challenged, that we don't know enough to talk about it. You know, that I don't feel the courage to speak about it. Baha'u'llah promises if you open your mouth and you prepare yourself, you'll have divine assistance. And the divine assistance will touch the hearts of the listeners. So don't really concern yourself. Put your trust in him and trust in those promises, and things go forward. Then he says, after you proclaim the faith, if anyone shows interest, teach them the cause. Now that's a very interesting difference, I think, hearing about proclaim and teach. And I thought a lot of it, and I don't know, my own determination after looking at all kinds of different writings of the faith and so on, is that we're called on to announce that such a thing has happened. Now there'd be so many different ways, and what I wanted to ask us is how, and you can, the friends of the faith here can think of how to do this too. How would you tell somebody else about the Baha'i faith? If you said, I went to a Baha'i meeting, oh, that's what is the Baha'i faith? Well, how would you answer? What would be the first thing that would come out of your mouth? Now, the Baha'is have to get it right. The rest, everybody can share their own opinions and views. But the Baha'is need to get it right. And what's right? And each of us needs to kind of inquire of ourselves, what's the most important thing to convey? What do people need to hear? And my own conclusion is that there's the fact that a new prophet, a new messenger of God has appeared, who himself claims to be sent by God and has given us a message. And that message contains the solutions to all the world's problems. It's a very challenging statement, but quite true. That's the basis of the Baha'i teachings. So how can we convey that? Not in an exaggerated way, but also in a humble way. Say, well, I'm a Baha'i, and we follow the teachings of Baha'u'llah. And we believe that Baha'u'llah was the latest of a series of divine messengers that have come to the planet. And it's important to know about him because his teachings constitute the healing and solution to the world's problems right now. Tamam shad, finished. That's it. That first thing. Then maybe the person says, oh, that's never heard of that. That's very interesting. What does he teach? Okay, that's the best of answers that you can. And then comes the second part of the command of Baha'u'llah. If they show interest, teach them. Share the teachings with them. in another tablet, he says that the first duty is to accept the manifestation of God for any soul, for every soul. He proclaims that for every soul on the planet. The first and most important duty is to recognize the manifestation in your day. And he says that the denial of the messenger in your day is really, from the point of view of God, the denial, your denial of the past messengers of the past. Because they're all one reality that's repeating the same message, adapted to the needs and conditions of the time in which they appear. So it's a really major challenge to sort it out. So out of delicacy with people who don't respond, Baha'u'llah says, don't argue with anybody. Don't try to counter if they say something like, well, I have my faith and that's quite sufficient for me. If they don't want to know anything, leave them to themselves. He says, pray for them and leave them to themselves. And Shoghi Effendi in his letters, he says, trust that the seeds of having heard that message goes inside the subconscious and pulsates. The call of God that we're one people, that we're one human race, we have to organize ourselves in such a way that there's justice for all the inhabitants of the earth, that nobody's left out, that there's education and health and prosperity and food for everybody on the planet, which is not such a complicated matter if there's unity of thought. That acts inside the individual. And he said, gradually, sometimes in a short period, sometimes in a long period, that consciousness will awaken, and they'll get, maybe they'll ask, I should know more about this Baha'i teachings, because everything I heard, I like it. Now I'm thinking about it, this makes sense. And gradually, according to each one, they can come to some understanding of it. This is the kind of the Baha'i trust that we have of passing the message to other people. But how to say those first things? What's the best way to phrase saying that there's a new messenger? His name is Baha'u'llah, and his teachings are the healing for the nations. How to do that? And when we think of, constantly the House of Justice and the writings of the faith, Abdul Baha said, you rise and proclaim the cause, teach the cause to others. Well, Baha'u'llah says, okay, first thing to do is teach yourself. Try to embody these teachings first in your own spirit, and then tentatively, step by step, you try to put the teachings in action. Try to obey the teachings, so to speak. Nobody's perfect. We don't get to the end of this road in this world. That's something for the other world. But we do need to at least have the intention of trying to fulfill them. I used to tell the youth in Haifa who were there volunteering, you make a resolution that you're not going to do this particular thing anymore, or you're going to avoid acting in a certain manner, or whatever it is. And then they say, I make the resolution, and then I fail. And we talk about in terms of, if you fall down, in the Baha'i teachings, if you fall down, you get up again. There's no finish to that. There's no eternal damnation in that sense. You're trying to raise yourself up. You're trying to improve your standard. And I must say, in the Baha'i prayer books, there's these wonderful prayers for forgiveness. But this is also helping us to lift so that we can give the faith in a sincere, pure form, communicate it to others. Even with these few brief words that we're talking about, we should be able to touch the hearts of those that are receptive. Those that are, as Shoghi Effendi said, waiting souls. They're waiting souls. They're souls that God has created. A certain percentage of humanity is more receptive than the rest. And when they hear about it, they immediately take heart. They say, this is so interesting. Or I've been searching for that. Or you tell somebody about the Baha'i teaching and say, I've always believed that. They never heard it before in their lives, but they say they always believed it. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. So then he says, teach yourselves, and only after you teach yourselves, and of course this is a relative matter of how much you learn little by little, then open your mouth and teach others. if you try to teach others before you have absorbed the teachings, or the spirit of the teachings, or the sincere intention to pass it to others, he said your words will take no effect in their hearts. Your words. His words will take effect, but whether you can get those into their hands or not, if they can read a prayer, or if they can see some hidden words, or read some of the Kitab, the Book of Certitude, all these things can have an immediate influence on the soul. Baha'u'llah says the prophets have come to lift two veils that keep us from seeing God. And their teachings are centered on the removal of these two influences. One, he said, is self-love, pride. I am the sunshine of my life. I'm my favorite person, so on. It is the opposite, he tells us, of love of God. The love of God is the highest we can aim at, and the default is love of self. Selfishness, taking advantage of others, doing everything that's better for me, and, you know, who's going to love me if I don't love myself?
Ego?
Ego, exactly. Self-love, pride, ego, various names of one very sinister reality. And God has given us this physical body, which is where this selfishness rests, so that we can distinguish between light and darkness. That's a kind of a high philosophical principle that Abdu'l-Baha talks about. He says that, he said, if there were no illness, how would you know what health is? If there were no darkness, how would you understand light? Darkness is not real, it's the absence of light. But having this absence of light in your material, physical being, having illness there as well, you can recognize the positive qualities. Then also, with regard to pride, we're constantly faced with social situations because we're a social animal, in the sense we have to mix with each other. Not like the sparrows that fly around and they pick up seeds and they really don't depend on anybody. You know, we've got to have somebody that provides the gas for our cars, and so many diverse aspects of life to which all of the people, all of you, are contributing in one way or another. He's created us in such a way that we can't go around naked or get too cold or too hot. He requires us to have a diverse diet so that we can stay healthy. All these things imply interaction with other human beings. It's part of God's plan. Now, the second veil, he says, is passion. Carnal passion. We all got it. It comes on us in waves and we try to resist it. And it through the practice of a holy life, of a chaste life, Baha'u'llah says, gradually the influence of this thing can be reduced. The noisome savors of our transgressions of the past can be removed. The meddling of the whispering of our selfish desires can be quieted. The prayers are for that. The acceptance of the faith is for that. The practice of the Baha'i teachings, all of that tends to lift those veils. As the veils lift, then the light of the revelation shines. It's in the heart already. My love is in thee. Get thou from it thy radiance. Wow, that's one of the hidden words. Now, you know, Baha'u'llah himself says that as in the case of Christ and Muhammad, these words are not from him, but from the one maker, the one sustainer, the one conscious intelligence behind the whole universe. Provides these messengers of God throughout the worlds of God with the divine message appropriate to the time in which they appear amongst the people. So it seems to me that basically that's the message we have to give. Now, we could ask ourselves, what resources do we have in the Baha'i writings that would make it easier to give a basic summary of the Baha'i teachings? What are the things that would be useful to say? And I wanted to recommend one tonight that's a statement, a brief statement by Shoghi Effendi, not so brief, but the briefest we have, summarizing the whole meaning of the Baha'i faith, that was his response to a United Nations committee which asked for an appraisal or a definition by each of the religions in the Holy Land, in Palestine at that time, Israel, of what is their teaching about? What's their religion? What's their religion for? And Shoghi Effendi answers in this beautiful letter to this committee. So I wanted to think it's helpful if we maybe examine a few of the phrases here, just to give you an idea of how one can go about consolidating the use of a certain kind of language to deliver the faith. Now, at the same time, Baha'u'llah says, in any teaching circumstance, if after you've said what the simplest proclamation of Baha'u'llah has come and his teachings are for everybody and they're to guide us, and they ask to know about it, what would be the kinds of things that will be the next thing you would say? But at the same time, Baha'u'llah says, trust in the spirit of the teachings that you've absorbed because you've taught yourself the teachings, that in that spirit you would be prompted to maybe mention the thing that the person most needed to hear. And I find that experience moving around, the Baha'is oftentimes affirm that. They say, people said, you know, you gave a talk, and they said, I would think of a question and you would answer it while you were speaking. I mean, nobody's made the question in the air, but it's the nature of that. And the people who had the privilege of making pilgrimage to the Holy Land and sat in the presence of the guardian, Shoghi Effendi, the great-grandson of Baha'u'llah, they said, some of them said, he reads your mind, you know. And I don't know, I don't think Shoghi Effendi necessarily was busy trying to read your mind, but he's connected to the source of inspiration that has intuitive awareness of the needs of people. So as he speaks, he says things that touch and confirm them, you know, it directly relates to it. And they're startled because they say, I just formulated this question. There was a lady, her name was Helen Bishop. She was a Baha'i from Portland, well-educated woman. And Shoghi Effendi had encouraged her to travel in Europe and in Eastern Europe and give lectures at universities. Very capable, and she did that. And then she went to visit the Holy Land. So she was going to be a pilgrim. And she thought to herself, she hadn't met Shoghi Effendi yet, she thought to herself, I should formulate some very difficult questions to impress the guardian on how much I know about the Baha'i faith. Okay. So she had that idea. She went to the Holy Land and she was greeted and sat at the guardian's table with the other pilgrims, and Shoghi Effendi greeted her very warmly and sat her at his right side. And then he turned his attention to everybody else at the table, one by one, talked to them, encouraged them, asked news of where they'd come from, while the dinner was being served, and they were all partaking of a meal together. And Mrs. Bishop was thinking to herself, he doesn't look at me at all. He's paying no attention to me whatever. And she got feeling very concerned and worried. And then it dawned on her that she had the presumption to formulate questions instead of, let's see what he's going to tell us. She had these questions that she thought would be impressive to ask for the guardian. When she thought that, she said, I felt so ashamed of myself, and I asked forgiveness. I said, I renounced this whole idea completely. And he said, just after she said that, he turned to her and he said, and Mrs. Bishop, he said, you must have some questions. And she said, I couldn't remember any at that point. And it was only the next day that some of the questions came back and Shoghi Effendi addressed some of the points that she was interested in. I was like, anyway, there is a certain level of trust that one has in conversations on spiritual matters, and anybody that wants to try to convey the teachings is told to pray. They're prayers so that you can have this kind of inspiration, so that you can share it adequately. The other response to the, oh, that's lovely, I'd like to hear something about it, is when the person turns to you and said, oh, how nice, I'm glad you find something you like. Which is, there's nowhere to go from there. You can't go forward. All right. What did Shoghi Effendi tell this International Committee of the United Nations about the Baha'i faith? He opens with a paragraph which situates the faith in the Holy Land. I mean, they're asking the question about what is the Baha'i faith and what is its relation to this land. And he answers, he says, the faith established by Baha'u'llah was born in Persia about the middle of the 19th century and has, as a result of the successive banishment of its founder, culminating in his exile to the Turkish penal colony of Akka, which was north of Haifa and is now part of Israel, and his subsequent death and burial in its vicinity, fixed its permanent spiritual center in the Holy Land, and is now in the process of laying the foundations of its world's administrative center in the city of Haifa. By the way, the year is 1947, just before the vote for the partition of Israel and Palestine. Now, the next thing he does is he defines the position of the faith. He said why it's in Palestine. Now he says, what's the position of the faith in the world? And look how he does this. He says, alike in the claims unequivocally asserted by its author and the general character of the growth of the Baha'i community in every continent of the globe, it can be regarded in no other light than a world religion, destined to evolve in the course of time into a world-embracing commonwealth. Early spring. We're not yet into summer and fall. This is coming. Now, one of the things here he says, the claims of Baha'u'llah. I mean, it couldn't be anything more challenging than who Baha'u'llah says he is and what he is. But on the other hand, who possibly, coming representing God as the Lord of hosts, would be able to tell us who he is except himself? So when Christ says, I and the Father are one, that's also a very challenging kind of a statement. We have to understand the meaning of all of these various phrases, and Yugon class, the Book of Certitude, goes into so many details about that, how to reconcile the apparent differences between the religions. Anyway, he says that the advent of this commonwealth that's coming must signalize the golden age of mankind. And then he defines it. He says, this is the age in which the unity of the human race will have been unassailably established, its maturity attained, its glorious destiny unfolded through the birth and efflorescence of a world-encompassing civilization. Now, in a conversation, you might not be able to get all that out with such highly significant terms, but the sense of it somehow we have to absorb and be able to try to communicate to people. Baha'u'llah's brought a religion. He's explained what its purpose is, and he has also, as a result of that, raised up followers who've carried it to the ends of the earth, and now we have a worldwide Baha'i community, and he promises that that community will grow to become the kingdom of God on earth. Right? And again they say, well, I'm glad you found something you like. You don't know how they're going to respond to that. But we need to think about it too. in the process of this kind of a definition, Baha'is themselves revision the faith. They come to see it in broader terms than maybe they've thought of before, you know. This is this blessed Shoghi Effendi, my God, what a vision he has, how he sets things down, and in what clarity, in what language. All right, then he goes on. He's established the idea of why it's in the Holy Land, what's its relationship with the planet and the future of the human race. Now he goes into the question, what is its connection with the other religions? Let's see if we can follow this. Though sprung from Shia Islam and regarded in the early stages of its development by the followers of both the Muslim and Christian faiths as an obscure sect, an Asiatic cult, or an offshoot of the Mohammedan religion, this faith is now increasingly demonstrating its right to be recognized not as one more religious system superimposed on the conflicting creeds which for so many generations have divided mankind and darkened its fortunes, but rather as a restatement of the eternal verities underlying all the religions of the past. And that's on the one hand, and on the other, as a unifying force. And he gives a fourfold explanation of the unifying force that the Baha'i faith represents to other religions. Instilling into its adherents, into the adherents of these religions, a new spiritual vigor. Infusing them with a new hope and love for mankind. Firing them with a new vision of the fundamental unity of their religious doctrines. And unfolding to their eyes the glorious destiny that awaits the human race. In a time that we live in, this is a message of such terrific prospect of hope and peace for mankind that it's just an extraordinary statement. You can get copies of this and print it and share it with the people here. But then he moves away from what its relationship is with the past and with mankind and with this future state of Israel, and he focuses on the basic teachings of the faith. What are the first teachings that Shoghi Effendi, out of the whole revelation of Baha'u'llah, 100 volumes of revelation, what does he point to? What does he indicate? What does he indicate as the most essential aspects of this message? The fundamental principle enunciated by Baha'u'llah, the followers of his faith firmly believe. Look how courteous and gracious this is, not imposing the truth on anybody. He's saying, I'm explaining to you what the Baha'is firmly believe. What you do about it is something else. He can't command you what to do. He can tell you how important it is and how you think about it, how we would urge you to think about it. Then he says that he gives 9 aspects of progressive revelation. This is the most complete definition I've seen of this. You've all been, I think, exposed enough to the Baha'i teachings to realize that the Baha'is believe that the religions are all connected one with the other. Each one prophesies the coming of the future one and also confirms the past one. None of the religions reject the religions of the past. They build on them, but they have trouble recognizing the one that comes after. In any case, Baha'is declare that this progressive revelation is the key to the unification of the religious followers of all the religions of mankind. Here are the 9 phrases he connects with that. He says, the first one is that religious truth is not absolute but relative. Think of Christ stating that I have many things to tell you now, but you cannot bear them. Albeit when he, the Spirit of truth, is come, he will guide you into all truth. Baha'u'llah cites this phrase, and he says, this day is the fulfillment of that prophecy. Religious truth is not absolute, but relative. How was Christ perfectly capable, perfectly conscious to be able to declare the oneness of the human race, but at the time the earth was flat and nobody knew anything about America? How could he give a spiritual and religious principle of a future that was inconceivable by the people? Look at Islam got in trouble a lot for saying that the earth was going around the sun. They said, well, that's a mistake, until they found out scientifically that it wasn't a mistake. Muhammad was right. Then the view changed. But the point is that there are certain things that God can tell us that don't fit for us right now. What, let's say, hypothetically, what if there was a planet that was quite advanced amongst our neighboring planets, and we began connection with them? Then Shoghi Effendi suggests we will need a manifestation of God to establish the principles and rules that would connect our two civilizations together. But that's something that's relative to a time that we don't live in. What the most important truth that we have right now is, how do we bring a reconciliation of all these peoples with diverse creeds and teachings and understandings, with strange political philosophies? How do we bring them into a unified approach to solving the world's problems? The second one, he says, is that divine revelation is a continuous and progressive process. He stresses that God has never left humanity bereft of guidance. He always sends guidance, fresh guidance. And that each time the outpouring of truth is greater than in the past. So this is also an answer to those that say, well, I have my religion, that's quite sufficient for me, I don't need another one. This is basically a lack of sufficient study of one's religion to realize that one's religion is a confirmation of the covenant of the past that promised their faith would come, and also it has implications of a messenger to come in the future. In the case of Islam, they say Muhammad was the seal of the prophets, but he also talks about the coming of Al-Rahman, the coming of the All-Merciful in the future, who will make the earth a paradise and change everything that's here. That all the great religions of the world are divine in origin. The great religions, they're not going to, they can't come out of a human being. They're not a philosophy. Philosophers, sometimes they give beautiful teachings, but they're very seldom the first ones to live their lives. Whereas the prophets of God mostly are giving their existence, or are martyred or persecuted terribly for the messages that they bring. Then Baha'u'llah declares that their basic principles are in complete harmony. If you look at the basic principles, not food laws or secondary laws related to how many times to pray a day, those kind of things change in each faith. But prayer is always there, and sometimes food laws. In this case, Baha'u'llah says now science has come to the stage where it can explain things to us. There's no reason to prohibit eating of shellfish and pork and things like that, so it doesn't matter. It's not essential anyway. Then he says their aims and purposes are one and the same. If you examine carefully, it's the upliftment and preparation of souls for the next life, for the life to come. That's the basis of all these faiths and many other things. That their teachings are but facets of one truth, that their functions are complementary. That's an interesting one to explore and see, in truth, is that the case? Is that the way? That they differ only in the non-essential aspects of their doctrines. And these are these secondary laws that have to do with the social practices of the age in which they appear. So then you have certain laws of Islam that are at variance with the laws of Christianity, which are at variance with the laws of Judaism. But not the essential teachings, not the eternal teachings, not the existence of God, not the oneness of God, not the existence of the soul, nor the question of life after death. All these are affirmed throughout these major faiths. And then he says, and that their missions represent successive stages in the spiritual evolution of human society. What a terrific truth. Shoghi Effendi outlines, he says, we come through, our social evolution has started with the concept of the unity of a family, that by the prophets establishing marriage and the caring of one's children and the respect, laws about the respect of the children for their parents. These are all embedded in the early books of the Bible that we have, Judaism. Then he says the next stage is tribal unity, where these families united into tribes. And he said the progressive revelations of the different prophets accompany, or if not, they're not absolutely identical in time, but they're identical in the spirit that they produce. And then city-states were formed. You didn't always have these nations that we have now, you know. These are modern things. Then with the coming of Muhammad, the concept of a state, of a nation is formed. And that spreads throughout the world until we have this whole body of nations that we have now presently. Now Baha'u'llah has said the time of nationhood is over. Now we have to have international unity, that the solution to the world's problems should be addressed collectively by representatives of all mankind. And people will say, oh, the United Nations hasn't worked very well. Well, okay, that's a rehearsal. Certain steps are being taken there that show that some of what the United Nations has done has been very helpful. Others, it's got this political competition still of national states that put their state and our sovereignty ahead of everybody else. Baha'u'llah declares in something that I remember I heard here in Benedict Canyon, the first time I heard about the faith, it was here in a home on Benedict Canyon, a family called the Willows. And the speaker said, Baha'u'llah says that the earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens. When I heard that, I thought, well, that's beautiful, I like it. Didn't understand anything about it. I mean, when you start moving forward with it, the earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens. God is presuming that Baha'u'llah is speaking on behalf of God. God is saying, O people of the earth, this is one country. We've given you the planet with all its riches for the well-being of the whole human race. Organize yourselves. You're all citizens. Everyone's responsible. Now, with some further explanations Abdul Baha makes about when the world leaders and the representatives of the nations get together, they have to establish the foundation of a permanent and lasting peace and provide for the well-being. And he said one of the things that they'll have to do is decide on the natural resources of the planet. The resources of the planet belong to the human race, not to the nation that's on top of them. So one place is full of diamonds, another is full of petrol or whatever it is, oil. They're enjoying that at the expense of the loss of all the rest of the citizens of the world. They're losing that. You can see the terrific injustices inherent in this, and why Baha'u'llah says we have to move beyond nationalism and form some kind of world superstate of some sort to protect the interests of all mankind. So this is this overview of progressive revelation, why it's so important if we can come to common understandings. He goes on to refer to some of the basic Baha'i teachings. Are you are we all exhausted and tired now, or can I read another paragraph for you? What do you think? Oh, nobody has to leave. You can fall asleep where you're sitting up there. That's too much. Okay, look, this is important for us, also for us as Baha'is, to think of how we would phrase these different principles, because there's different ways to say it. I mean, I sometimes hear about Baha'is, I hear them talking about the faith, and they say, well, we say men and women are the same. Men and women are the same? Not quite, you know. I mean, is that what you believe? Okay. That's very different from saying that the rights, privileges, and opportunities for men and women have to be the same. That's quite a different explanation. And that's what the principle is. Not that we're the same. We're not the same, actually. God bless the difference. So how about the other one? They say, we believe in universal peace. Oh, that's very nice. Where do you see that? Okay, then you presume, well, they must want universal peace. Yes, that's true. But then, you know, when you'll see when we get to that phrase in the Guardian's words, how beautifully he connects it with a verb and with other explanations, other modifying terms. All right, he said first. I've skipped over a whole paragraph of his purpose, Baha'u'llah's purpose, of his mission. I'm coming to the basic teachings just as an example for us. He says the Baha'i faith upholds the unity of God. Look how he comes back to that first principle. And the second, he recognizes the unity of his prophets and inculcates the principle of the oneness and wholeness of the entire human race. It proclaims the necessity and the inevitability of the unification of mankind. It's coming. Now we see that happening in our own lifetimes. What a difference. I mean, you know, I've been around 80 years, and there's a big difference. You talked about these things back in the 50s. It was totally a utopia. Nobody could imagine. But the youth of today view the human race as one. They have enough images. The whole question of media, everything has provided us with a picture of everybody else. The winners and the losers at the Olympic Games is another sample that lets us know that we all have the same basic feelings in our souls and in our experience. Films have done this too now. So many things are the mixture of the races. The wars, as terrible as they have been, have also displaced masses of people which then have mixed together in new ways. Colonialism did the same thing. It established colonial lines and eventual independent countries. The lines ran between major tribes and divided them in such a way that they couldn't really fight with each other anymore. They mixed in big cities, and the differences, so many of the differences have worn down and blended together. Asserts that humanity is gradually approaching, that the unification of humanity is gradually approaching, and claims that nothing short of the transmuting Spirit of God working through his chosen mouthpiece in this day can ultimately succeed in bringing it about. Quite a firm principle that Abdu'l-Baha talks about. He said, nothing but the power of the Divine Spirit, or what Christians call the Holy Spirit. The Spirit that comes out of the divine verses of the holy books, that transforms and uplifts and fires the vision of people when they read it with faith and hope. Then he said that the Baha'i faith, moreover, enjoins upon its followers the primary duty of an unfettered search after truth. If everybody says, oh, I couldn't follow your faith because my parents are Buddhists. And then the rest of the people say, I can't follow your faith because my parents were Christians. And the other one says, I can't follow your faith because my parents are Muslims. Baha'u'llah is saying, the only way to get us past this division, frightful, war-engendering division, actually, when you look at the wars that we've had in the past centuries, we've got to be ideology, wars of ideology, we've got wars of religious intolerance. How are we going to get over this? He said, read the scriptures of the other faiths. Look at them together and you'll see they're all animated by the same spirit. And how many gods is there going to be for this universe anyway? Condemns all manner of prejudice and superstition. This is a terrific challenge. We all have to examine our conscience, assumed attitudes that we have of superiority. Again, we're back to the question of the veil of pride and self-love. Declares the purpose of religion to be the promotion of amity and concord. If it doesn't produce friendliness and fellowship amongst people, better not have the religion. We're filled with superstitions and fears of what will happen if we don't believe this way or that way. And we all, the followers of the past faiths, are suffering from terrific sectarian violence and differences within their own religions, not only with other religions, but within their own faiths. Proclaims the essential harmony of religion with science. We could spend a whole evening on that one. And recognizes it as the foremost agency for the pacification and the orderly progress of human society. Here we're talking about religion as that agency. But religion in its pure form, not the adulterated iteration of it by clergy that have their own self-interest. And finally, it unequivocally maintains the principle of equal rights, opportunities, and privileges for men and women. Insists on compulsory education. Now that we don't have clergy to tell us what the meaning of life is, we have to read it for ourselves. Everybody has to learn to read and write, and also they need to learn useful trades so that they can be contributing members of society. And we'll have to, as a human race, provide for this education. Eliminates extremes of poverty and wealth. Certain principles, economic principles that Baha'u'llah suggests, which have to be carried out by spiritual transformation of the individuals, by the spirit of wanting to help others, by sacrifice that is the result of religious unification, of spiritual vision, of one spiritual vision. Abolishes the institution of priesthood, prohibits slavery, asceticism, mendicancy, and monasticism. Now, mendicancy, is begging. Professional begging is forbidden in the Baha'i faith. But it also, Baha'u'llah enjoins on society to provide those institutions and means by which people will not have to beg. So this is something that comes into being gradual. It doesn't mean you can't give to somebody who's needy. We would give to people who are needy, but not necessarily the people who beg it, who have honed a profession out of asking people for help. Prescribes monogamy, basic law of the Baha'i teachings. Discourages divorce. Marriage is more challenging because it's the fundamental social institution of mankind. Baha'u'llah says it's dependent first on a couple choosing and desiring to marry each other, and before they can have a Baha'i marriage, their parents have to approve the choice of the spouse. That's very challenging. And I know the Baha'is have to sometimes act with terrific patience, but in the end, Baha'u'llah says the unity of the families and of societies depending on this mutual love for each other. And most of us in the room are old enough to think that we might be able to help our children choose the right kind of partner in case they just got carried away with some terrific passion of love and want to, they found Prince Charming or their darling love of their life. They've also had 3 or 4 of those before, but boy, there's some wisdom of age and experience which helps to guide the youth. Divorce is rather simple in the sense that if there's disunity, if the couple cannot tolerate each other at all, then Baha'u'llah says that he disdains divorce, but that it's allowed by God in the case of disunity, because disunity is so detrimental and destructive. Emphasizes the necessity of strict obedience to one's government. So we're not anarchists, this is not coming about because we're going to rise up like revolutionaries to try to impose these principles on others. Again, through the spirit, the right spirit, they should be shared. So when we're talking to people about the faith, we want to give that impression. We're like, take a look at this. This is something we have here is beautiful. Have you noticed this? How do you know about it? What do you think of it? Exalts any work performed in the spirit of service to the level of worship. Urges either the creation or selection of an auxiliary international language, and delineates the outlines of those institutions that must establish and perpetuate the general peace of mankind. A few paragraphs, he covers the whole relationship of the Baha'i faith to the state of Israel, to the peoples of the world in general, to the followers of other religions, and what is it that the Baha'i faith, what purpose does it have, what mission does it have, what is it proposing to do in the world, and invites everyone who finds these principles confirming and attractive, and in which belief in them arises, to contribute their support and efforts to it so it can grow. The next part of the whole thing is a brief history. What's the history of each of the central figures? You'll be interested to see that. And also for the Baha'is, if you take a look at the foreword to the book God Passes By, you have a kind of summary of the same things that we have here. A little more elaborated there. But if you were going to ask yourself, how can I, in a paragraph, tell the history of Baha'u'llah? It's here. And it's also in the foreword to God Passes By. Take a look at it. Write out, identify the different elements that are there, so when you can practice repeating it in a way that is sufficiently inclusive to be able to demonstrate what was the ministry of the Bab, what was the mission of Baha'u'llah, what happened to him at a personal level, and then of his son Abdul Baha, who was the third of the 3 central figures of the Baha'i faith. I'm sure you've been hearing in the meetings about all 3 of them. We're in the bicentenary of the birth of the Bab this year, 2019. So the Baha'is are preparing to commemorate in the fall that particular event. And thank you very much for your patience. And I hope the Baha'is will look into these documents and think about how they will be able to present in as accurate a way as possible the truth and the purposes of the Baha'u'llah's coming. Thank you. Yep, it's okay. Anybody needs to go home, that's all right too. But I'm happy to, if I can answer any questions, that's fine. It seems to me that the kind of meeting, this kind of a meeting, which is really a bit advanced for some of you who've heard these some of these basic teachings in other meetings. But the Baha'is have, for lack of another word, firesides, in a sense, which are really information meetings. That is, coming together where someone explains, gives a bit of an overview of what is the Baha'i faith, who is Baha'u'llah, what's he come for, which contains basically all these elements, or some of them, and perhaps not others that we haven't heard of. So this is preliminary to what now in the Baha'i faith we have institute courses. I think some of you have studied some of the institute books, the Ruhi, presently the Ruhi Academy from Colombia has provided books that are being used for this purpose. But the institute process is one of the core activities of the Baha'i faith. I think it's interesting for us to know that the present content of it is the Ruhi system. The Ruhi system is not the institute process. It is the present material used in the institute process. Because there may come a time when we evolve enough that there'll be another set of booklets. But the purpose of the Ruhi booklets is to inspire us to arise in service to mankind, perform acts of service to others, and in that way enhance our spiritual life, and also to encourage us to go beyond the training that it provides to the spiritual deepening and education of the soul in the many, many Baha'i books that we have. This is the Kitab is one of the essential ones that mentioned in the writings. The Kitab is some answered questions, and the Dawnbreakers, another very important history of Nabil's, the chronicler of the early 9 years of birth and suffering and martyrdom of the Bab, is recounted in this terrific volume. Do you have a copy of it here somewhere? I don't know. Don't see it. It's quite sizable. You can see it another time, but it's a wonderful book, wonderful volume.
Question, please. Feel free to answer the question.
About Iran, actually, book. When we started, my vision to Islam, because I'm Muslim.
Muslim background,
my, actually family, my mother, and then my vision totally changed, because I believe right now the Muslim, they're totally thinking wrong about the past religion, and also for Baha'i faith, and also the other faiths.
Also the future of Islam, which has got terrific conflict inside Islam.
Yeah, actually they stopped in 1400 years ago.
Yeah.
One of the problems we have in Islamic country, they have no knowledge about the others, because the government, they keep them in the darkness. They don't like them, they learn. That's why the first time I hear about the Baha'i faith was in the US when we came here. The thing is, you have any program in Baha'i faith to change this situation, to teach them, or like any material that you can use to teach and improve this knowledge within Islamic country, because they are in darkness, totally. And then they cannot receive. And knowledge is darkness. Their knowledge actually is, they don't know anything about the Baha'i, they don't know the message of Baha'u'llah. The only thing they know is we are right, and this is the only way we have to go.
Yeah.
And then they don't have, when they talk to them, they don't have any solution for all problems that you said. We are involved right now in the whole world.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I hear in, actually in Beitul Ads, they're working in the program for future. Do you have any program for it?
The internet is cracking this, because people can look privately.
But not in those countries, because they filter everything, they control what you see, what you think. I think they have to do something that change this situation.
I think, yeah, but even before that, there were some major leaks. For instance, we put up the Kitab in Arabic online.
Yes.
When I was in the Holy Land. And within 2 weeks, 4,000 or 5,000 people in Arab countries had downloaded a copy of the Akdas in Arabic. So there's
Yeah, it's gonna be
The-
good.
it-
Right now, it's totally changed than 100 years ago.
in Yemen, one of the tribal leaders in the desert there was feeling that Islam is not right and something has to happen. There has to be another stage to vindicate the truth of Islam and bring it back to its purity and so on. And he searched on the internet and he found Baha'i teachings. And he went and he studied with some of his immediate aides, a tribe of 500, studied the Kitab memorized the Salat, memorized the Kitab itself over a period of several years. No knowledge of any Baha'i in the world. They just knew the teachings. Then he was mentioning to somebody about it. The women were doing Ruhi classes and studying the Baha'i teachings in the tribe. Really terrific consolidation. Now, he went to the city and they told him somebody said, there is a Baha'i here, he's a mechanic. He was a Persian, he was there, and he had his auto shop. So he went to the auto shop and he had his big sword on him and he went and he pulled him out from under the car. He was on one of those conveyors, He said, Allah Apa to him. And scared the pioneer to death because they don't teach, they can't even mention the faith. They're very cautious, And he said, what? What are you saying to me? He said, aren't you a Baha'i? I'm saying Allah Apa. And this went through some discussion until he started reciting all the opening verses of the Akdas in Arabic to him. Well, the guy started softening, the Baha'i, so he accepted, talked to him, and they began to talk. Well, this fellow went and his tribe went and taught a neighboring tribe, and they were growing in the numbers of Baha'is that were there. And now at that point, the government arrested him, and for violating Islam or whatever. Then the tribespeople came and circled the prison, men and women, chanting, Halman mafaridin gairullah, qul subhanallah. All of them together over and over and over again until the prison warden said, I don't think it's wise to keep this man here. I think we should let him loose. And they let him loose and he went back with his tribe. And it developed. He became eventually a Baha'i official as well. He's in prison, condemned to death at the moment again now. But that all happened in some mysterious way. I mean, I think there's things that are happening. Some of these people travel out and then they look at the internet and they can see. And then they come back and tell family members or others. I don't think it can be kept a secret. It's causing more impact now, I think, every day in these countries. And of course, when there's persecution, then that calls attention to it. Everybody wants to know what is it and why are they attacking it. And they'll hear lies and they'll hear truths and have to sort it out. The day of judgment, we're in a very serious time. And the materialism is so prevalent in the world that it's changed the whole outlook of people. They don't think religion has any role or importance. They think politics can solve problems. Politics cannot solve the world's problems, not a chance. It just gets more and more grim, the situation.
Another question I have regarding this, in other religions, the politics and religion is mixed. In Baha'i faith is separate, and you believe the religious things not be interfered to the politics, or advise the politicians, or they have
we will have it completely separate and don't involve ourselves in political factions and matters while we're the minority in a country. But once we're majority, we would expect that the minority would respect that our views will become national law or vision of the future. But we don't know, not now, no.
But if one day coming and then, one country was to choose the whole country as a Baha'i, the Baha'i faith actually interfered with their daily life about, not religion part, about what they eat, what they
Well,
wear.
what's the non-religion part?
Because the example I have is Iran. Right now, religion is everywhere. Even when you go to the restaurant, religion is following you.
Yeah.
You have to go to the restroom with your left feet.
Foot
You cannot
first.
go back with the right. I'm talking
Yeah, I
about
see.
this. And then also the other part of your life, like you have to read just this. You cannot read this. You have to go, this is only, no. You cannot go to whatever you like.
This is a problem that we have. This is a problem, and people are noticing it. You're noticing it. I mean, people notice that this is not correct and want to be free from that. And Baha'u'llah said, don't add rituals, don't add customs to the faith. Be very careful to not mix it. Keep it pure. And he says you have local spiritual assemblies, so you have consultative bodies everywhere to guide the Baha'is in how to act in their relationships with themselves and with, at this time, obedience to government and submission to whatever civil law says. So, but there'll be more and more influence, because even as the House of Justice, we had government leaders, we had presidents come and ask us, what's our advice on certain subjects? When I was sitting in the House of Justice in the Holy Land, it's quite interesting, the coming and going of political figures. And we offer guidance from the Baha'i teachings, not solutions to the problems, political problems they have in their countries, but simply the example of what Baha'u'llah said, what's the road to solution to problems of that nature, Quite interesting. And we have in the United Nations, we're represented as a non-governmental organization in the United Nations. We make statements in conferences and things, which are generally greatly appreciated. The main representatives of the Baha'i community that are at the United Nations, they're the one most frequently called on to be the head of committees, because they're the only ones, he said, they'll give any that are fair to the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians and all the parties that are background people in these committee activities, which we really try to do the best that can be done.
I have another question, but
But
But I know what he wants. He wants to know if a country becomes a Baha'i, is it going to happen the same way that it's a Muslim country is? That's not it. You're not, each individual, they're not going to tell them, this is the time you have to pray right now, come out there and pray.
yeah, we don't know exactly how that's going to evolve, but the Baha'i faith is a community, and it should be able to operate. And if the whole state is the community, then it'll operate according to the laws and teachings of the Akdas. I mean, this is the basis of society of the future, but we don't know when will that come or how it will come. But it doesn't come by armed revolution or anything like that. It comes by changing the majority of the human hearts in the country. And any ideas you have how to spread it in Muslim lands will be greatly appreciated. No, I mean, if you have, yeah.
And then Stephen, I think, has a comment as well.
We were at the Phoenix conference in Arizona, and to refer to your first question, what are the Baha'is doing today to promote the faith in, let's say, Iran? There's a Baha'i radio that's being reached by the Muslims in Iran, and they had this beautiful recording of people leaving a message that I can't believe this channel, this radio station is amazing. Me and my family are sitting down listening. We are learning so much. Please keep it going. And these are Muslims, who are...
Technology right now changing a lot,
Right.
They opened a lot of windows to Iran, but still I believe, as people that came 20 years ago from Iran, still 20 years ago compared to now is totally different.
Yeah.
But still I think it's not enough. They can spend more, invest more time and also energy to at least, because believe me, if
People are hungry.
yes, they're hungry, really hungry, and then they like to know. Even last year I went to Mecca, Saudi Arabia. The version of Islam I saw over there was totally different than in Iran and the other Islamic country. Each one of them, they believe in different type of Islam.
Wow.
You know, in Iran, the government force you to go to masjid. In Saudi Arabia, when the people hear the azan, they automatically, like the robot, they go to the masjid. In Kuwait, I was in Dubai also, it was different type. You know, that shows we are lost.
Yeah.
Divided.
No, it's a great importance. Is God had to reunify the heart of the religions too, and that's restated by Baha'u'llah. He says it's a restatement of the eternal verities of the faith. It isn't something completely different and odd. It's right along what we all believe, you know.
I have a question.
Well, I don't know, maybe it's not, I think what my friend Alex might have been asking, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Dunbar, is perhaps he was asking that in the event of a Baha'i majority state, what would be the attitude of a state in which the Baha'i faith is the official religion, for example, towards the minority religions within that?
Or individual.
Or, yeah.
Or the individuals.
And on the one hand, and second, once there is an authoritative government that embodies Baha'i teachings, how would they then go about enforcing those teachings both to the Baha'is and to those citizens that are not Baha'is? With the example of, in what we have seen in theocratic states, in today, that we see now, for example, in Iran, and in our own history, go back 500 years in Europe, theocratic states, in which religious observances are, enforced, etc., and there's intolerance.
There's a number of basic statements on how the Baha'is will uphold and protect minorities within any state arrangement that might come up when the Baha'is are a majority. That's clearly stated by Baha'u'llah himself. And the individual has right to property, right to certain things that it's not communism or socialism in that sense. And you need to look a little bit into those writings in the faith. They're quite available and they're online as well.
Yep.
So, but we're faced with the greater problem of unifying worldview on life on the planet and how to go forward in a peaceful manner. And arriving at this question of states that would embrace the Baha'i principles fully, I think we're quite a distance from those two, several hundred years away from that possibility. Although there's a lot of change current. I think you may have found this in Iran. There was such a hostile feeling about the Baha'is, but now gradually it's spreading amongst people that they've been lied to about the Baha'i faith, that the Baha'i faith is not what the government has been telling us, that the government is afraid of the Baha'is, that it's something quite different from what we thought it was. And I know because I was a guard in the prison and I saw the spirit of the Baha'is who were being killed, the attitude that they had towards others, the spirit of forgiveness they had towards the executioners. When these stories spread, it is going. And the ridiculous idea that they sleep with their brothers and sisters in the feasts and all this garbage that they spread. I think they're realizing, and also the Baha'i radio station has helped a lot, and a lot of people have become Baha'is actually through it, have become Baha'is.
Through that, right?
I heard a story years ago about a boy, teenage boy, had heard Baha'i radio, and he was afraid. He listened to it inside under the covers in his bed,
Wow.
and so on, and didn't want to say anything to anybody, and because he'd heard so much criticism of the Baha'is, and he loved it. And one day he was talking with his brother, and he just kind of wanted to hint at something like that, and he found out the brother was listening in his bed to the radio program too. And I know there's heartwarming things like that, but it's taking time. But there were placards for the Baha'is in the Green Revolution, the things that took place after that election of the president, or there were posters in the air against the faith, and there were posters in favor of the faith not being carried by Baha'is. All right, what is that all about? That's quite interesting. We'll see something. There's something unfolding there and the House of Justice writes wonderful messages to the Baha'is of Iran in Farsi. I don't know if you've seen some of those or not. Have you seen any of those? You should see them.
Yeah, of course.
You've seen them. So, I remember we sat in the house, we said, let's send messages to the Iranian Baha'is that the non-Baha'is can read over their shoulders to understand how we feel about Iran, to remove this idea that we have a prejudice against Iran or we hate Iran because they persecute us or all these different things, and how Baha'u'llah says it will become a leading country of the world. And these wonderful things we have in the teachings about when the Iranian people arise.
For the Baha'i inside Iran is their patient. They never, compared with the other, group of people that they're thinking different than, the Islam. I think the Baha'is, that's why everybody likes this way, because they never fight back.
Yeah.
They never say anything, but they're very kind, very cool, very calm. They just, invite the other people, just if we are wrong, show us that we are wrong. But nobody, even government cannot show them that you are wrong.
Yeah.
And this is amazing.
No, the Baha'is, because the spirit of the faith is so strong that they know time is on our side.
And they're not saying anything different.
Yeah.
But the government shows different.
It's an extraordinary situation. Please.
Actually, you asked the question which I wanted to ask, but I can add something in support of what you were saying about how the faith is becoming more accepted by the people in Iran. I was watching a video a couple of years ago of during the demonstration against the government, a huge group of people walking the street, and they were saying that we support our Baha'i brothers and sisters. And it was a huge mass, demonstrators. And they were not Baha'is, obviously. They were general population, perhaps Muslims.
That was extraordinary. I remember we were startled by it. No, it's something big will happen. When you remove the constraints on the faith, it's potentially in so many hearts that I think there'll be quite a sizable Baha'i community will develop. We'll see.
The last question. You mentioned that the first word you hear from Baha'i faith went in through your heart was what? The first word.
I don't know. The whole first meeting was, I was giggling actually. I was so excited. The hostess of the meeting thought I was high on drugs because I heard these things. I'd had a kind of spiritual vision the week before of realizing that there's a higher power and that they're looking over us. And the feeling that I had in that experience echoed in this first Baha'i meeting. I didn't know it was Baha'i then when I had that experience, but afterwards I realized this is the same thing. I'd been begging any higher intelligence than me that's conscious of me, let me know what I'm here for. I can't understand why I'm living here. Why have I been created? These people are running around like sheep, doing their things, and they all say, oh, you have to have a job, you have to have a family, I have to have some motivation to do any of this. I can't do it. my folks who weren't Baha'is and didn't ever become Baha'is, they said, "You're so cynical. How can you be so cynical at 17 years old?" But it was just that I didn't see any future, what to do with my life. I didn't feel motivated at all. And through the faith, everything changed. The film career changed too. Yeah.
You found your purpose.
I'm finding my purpose, you know. Now look, I don't have any reason to go around and give these talks. Nobody pays me anything for that. In fact, I make money with my art and I travel, pay it my way. But I know I want to make that contribution. I want to share the kind of experiences I had, because I've had a long, rich Baha'i experience in Latin America, in the Holy Land, traveling 16 countries of Africa, the European nations, summer schools over and over, all over Europe, giving courses and things. So the whole thing is, it's easy for me, and I want to see people take the joy that is given me and my wife.
Those videos is that they kind of give you a glimpse into like communities that are actually engaged in the process of building a more unified and just community, like in neighborhoods, you know, where we actually live, what it's looking like to unfold Baha'u'llah's teachings in those neighborhoods, and like the way that families are coming together, that youth are really serving their neighborhoods, the whole communities are advancing both materially and spiritually. So it's a really nice kind of practical glimpse into what it might look like when communities are really engaging in Baha'u'llah's teachings and putting them into practice.
And in different continents too.
Yeah.
It's not just American cities, it's all over.
All right.
Question. May I ask one question? Because you were talking about future. Right now, all the Baha'i institutions are being elected by Baha'is. Okay, let's say we have a city, we don't even have to talk about country. There's a village or whatever, there are 2,000 people there, 1,500 are Baha'is and 500 are not. And of course, at this point, only Baha'is elect the local assembly.
Mm-hmm.
And if they want to make some rules for a whole village, my point is it going to be a Baha'i institution aside to the government of that village, or Baha'i institution is going to be the only? Because if there is a government, we could elect the same method and things. We are electing local assembly. We could elect another body which all non-Baha'is and Baha'is could participate.
Mm-hmm.
And they could read the Kitab or others, whatever they decide to make it. They make what is it, rules instead of the religious rule, but it's just made by. So I'm trying to see, because everywhere.
That's a very good question. It's a study in development. I mean, it just depends on the evolution of the places. I know when I was in Southeast Asia over the holidays at a big conference in Malaysia, I met people from all the different countries around there and told me different news and things like that. In Papua New Guinea, a number of the villages, isolated tribal villages, we've got, some almost totally Baha'i, some 80%, some 70%, 80%. But in any case, the majority of the people. And they said now that in consultation, the tribal chief has said the local assembly is now the authority in this place. He's usually elected to the local assembly, but he cedes, because he's a Baha'i too, he cedes the authority to the collective consultative group, and it goes forward. But that might not be the same in other places. But in any case, generally, mankind accepts the majority rules. So if we've got the vast majority of the people electing the assembly, then the other people will have to be protected by that assembly, but also have to follow it. right now we're in the stage called administrative order of the faith. So I don't mess with any kind of civil authority at all. But gradually the houses of justice, local assemblies become houses of justice. And then they have responsibilities given in the texts for just government, just ruling, of providing for the well-being of the city and maintaining things and all the different things that come with that. But it's very early to kind of envision how that's going to be, obviously. But it's a good question, and it's under consideration. And it's developing in different ways in different places spontaneously. I know in the Philippines they have some villages where the majority is Baha'is, and they have a joint consultative on interesting points with the government council in the town. And some places then the government councils all have been elected. The Baha'is have been elected because they're good citizens and interested in the well-being of the place and better educated. So they all get elected. So then they sit there and talk together about, why do we have two systems here? Why don't we unite it? It's a work in progress, so to speak.
I have a quick question. You spoke earlier about the first step is to recognize the manifestation of the day. And I know it says that in the Kitab as well.
First line, yeah.
The first one. I just want to gauge your understanding of what exactly that means. Because my understanding of a lot of the things in the Baha'i writings is that the standard status quo definition of the words that are used are not always what they mean. For instance, I can't, that concept of somebody saying that the first step is to recognize the manifestation of the day, and yet they do recognize them, but at the same time they don't uphold or try to exemplify any of the qualities of the faith of manifestation that just spoke earlier and has taught about, and yet you have somebody, like we just had Martin Luther King Day the other day, who may have not in essence, or may not literally have recognized Mahalo as the manifestation of the day, but yet have many different attributes and qualities that the Baha'i faith praises and teaches. And that doesn't necessarily handcuff his spirit or his soul.
Yeah.
In my opinion, in that sense.
No, it's quite
So it's just me trying to understand what, because I've read it before, and there's been other things in the faith that I read and try to understand what it actually meant, because if you took it literally, it doesn't, for me at least, from my understanding of it, it doesn't connect with all the other things. And this is kind of one of them. For me, I don't understand.
That's one of the great challenges that what you're saying is one of the great challenges that Baha'is have. The cause will grow to the extent that we conform ourselves to the Baha'i teachings. If we don't make any change, and if we just go on living the same way and just as bad as the other people in our behavior, this is no example for the future and doesn't attract people. But remember what you're saying, the first line of the Akdas is recognition. And what does he say is the second one? The first one is recognize the manifestation. The second one is strict obedience to whatever he has prescribed. The one is not acceptable in the eyes of God without the other. And he really, that's the foundation. It's not to endorse nice teachings, but we have to try to change our lives. And that changing of lives is something that's not talked about very much, but is inherent in the Kitab, for instance, where he talks about the qualifications of the true seeker and the wedding of the soul with the city of God, with the inner meanings of the divine verses, with lifting these veils of pride and passion so that we have a more intimate communion directly with our Creator, who is sustaining us. I mean, we're told we are an emanation of the creative power of God. That's all we are. We're some atoms and things that are all stuck together here, yeah, but it's that spiritual reality which actually creates a physical vehicle. Mostly we have it backwards. We think physical beings have developed on this planet and they've gotten some kind of level of consciousness. This is totally backwards. Abdu'l-Baha says the foundation is all spiritual. There's a reality of you, of what you're going to become in the future before conception. At conception, it starts on a path of consciousness that grows through all the worlds of God, he said after. So did you want to say? Did you? No.
I think what my friend Navi is asking, can correct me if I'm wrong, is not so much what is the meaning of that first duty, but what are the implications for then from that statement of the first paragraph of the Akdas, Igan, and the first line, for those who do not recognize. So since that is, if that is the first duty prescribed by God to every human being, then I think what Navid is asking is, then those that don't recognize the manifestation of God for that day, and yet, such as, for example, Martin Luther King, seem to embody the principles that the manifestation of God has brought. I think what he's asking is, how are we to view that person's failure to fulfill their primal duty?
What I think I was trying to say in that sense is, for instance, is that an example? Because it's not literal. If you embody and exemplify all these qualities to make the world a better place and change them in a progressive way, such as somebody like Martin Luther King did, though he didn't literally recognize Baha'u'llah as a symbol of faith, is that not equivalent in some facets or some form? It's not exactly the same, but by making changes and by trying to exemplify these qualities, then in essence you may not have a symbol per se, and you may not have the direct guidance, but from the teachings and whatnot. But there is something to be said about, in my opinion, something to be said about that being an action to say that I recognize this as this action, this embodiment of improvement in the spirituality of others and making everybody better, as an example of recognizing the manifestation of God. It's not literal. I know it's kind of like a stretch, but I feel like...
No, that's fine, but we're talking about sequence here. You know, Shoghi Effendi says, if a person doesn't follow Baha'u'llah because they haven't heard of him, then whose fault is that? He says it's the Baha'i's fault, not the non-Baha'i's fault. And they will have an opportunity to recognize, if they haven't heard of the faith, when they enter the next world, he said they have an opportunity to recognize there. No guarantee they'll recognize there either. There's a entirely different set of circumstances, spiritual circumstances. But if a person is filled with pride, with self-love, they don't like looking in the direction of God, in the light of God. It hurts them, it offends them. They rile against it, and they have atheistic principles and so on that are established in their consciousness. That's going to be a problem for them in the next world. That's one thing. The other is that Martin Luther King has come along. We don't know that he knew very much about the Baha'i teachings. I'm sure he knew some Baha'is. He must have met Baha'is along the way. So it's part of a process that's going on. So we certainly recognize the importance of what he's given. But from a Baha'i point of view, think of it. The energies that Baha'u'llah has released. Who had the concept of oneness of mankind? Nobody had that. As a few dreamers of the past have had some vague reference to it. But establishing as the central principle of the religion of God in this day is the recognition of the oneness and wholeness of the human race. This is a spirit that's permeated the whole human race. Gradually it's percolating along, and it's coming out in the actions of people, in the vindications of people, in the attacks on hate speech and all the different things. Some of them too extreme and unpleasant, but there is a fermentation, Shoghi Effendi calls it, taking place because of the energies released by the Bab and Baha'u'llah. There's a fermentation in human society which doesn't allow it to remain in conflict with the principles and religion of God. It's God who's given us this. You don't just ignore it. You ignore it at grave consequence to yourself. I mean, sorry, don't mean to say it so strongly, but if the human race has had two divine messengers with more powerful revelation than anything they've had in the whole spiritual history of the world, and they're ignoring them, it is producing and will produce grave consequences for the human race. But those are consequences of cleansing and transformation. And that, Paul, if you read Promised Day Has Come, he talks about how humanity, having lent a deft ear to such a stupendous call, first by its kings and rulers that received tablets and directives from the messenger saying, I've come here from God and you're supposed to do. That's pretty challenging for them. Yeah, okay. But still, if they studied it in the right spirit, if they at least were open to it at all, they could have made a big difference. They ruled over humanity. They could have ordained that everybody study the Baha'i teachings or Baha'u'llah's teachings. There could have been a change. The other thing Abdu'l-Baha says, a frightening thing, he says, if the Baha'is had obeyed, the Baha'is who recognized had obeyed the Baha'i teachings, he said in 1915, the whole world would have been Baha'i by now. We have failed something terrible. I'm sorry. You haven't failed. I've failed. Somebody's failed to put this into practice sufficiently to be luminous examples of the spirit of the faith and of the love that it brings, and embrace people with it and give them hope and give them... Anyway, it's a big subject. It's very challenging, but certainly we recognize outstanding world leaders and rulers that are promoting the well-being of mankind. And this isn't something exclusive. But again, from a Baha'i point of view, it's that spirit that's permeated mankind that's producing these kind of results. It will raise up extraordinary individuals.
Well, that's why the Baha'is all over the world are engaged in these activities to bring about oneness of humanity and bring hearts closer to one another and work towards building better communities together. So I'm sensitive to the time and that we've kept you here. So we're gonna still mingle and socialize and ask questions individually, because I know several of our guests have to get up very early in the morning to go to work. So I wanted to make sure that I'm respecting that their wishes if they need to go home. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you. Nice to be with all of you.